libertarian, and a Republican. Welcome to Publitarian Podcast.
It's all over, everyone. We can all go home. We're all a bunch of liars and have been exposed for the frauds that we are. Just everybody, cool your jets. Let's pack it up, go home. NYU has done a study and found that there is no bias against conservatives on social media. That's right. NYU, that right-wing bastion of conservatism, has found no bias against conservatives on social media. Oh boy. Anyway, let's unpack this because everybody's running with this story now. Okay, so here's the backstory of what's happened with that. This has been on all the news sites, left and right wing, that this study in NYU has found no bias. Okay, so let's forget that it was funded by a liberal mega donor that started Craigslist, and also remove from your mind the fact that Twitter gave this study no evidence. Twitter gave this study the Twitter equivalent of there's no bias because we said so. They produced zero evidence of this. They literally said, yeah, we found no bias here. So Twitter investigated Twitter and found that Twitter did nothing wrong. And you guys need to accept that and go away and shut up. Anyway, you would think this is like The Onion or the Babylon Bee, but no. It came from the NYU Stern School of Business. It was funded by Craig Newmark, and he's the founder of the online marketplace Craigslist, and one of the many Silicon Valley billionaires who paid for the Joe Biden president campaign. So anyway, this was all funded by liberal money, including George Soros, the boogeyman that everybody loves to hate on the right. But I mean, he did help fund this. So Craig and George and Big Tech studied Big Tech and found that Big Tech did nothing wrong. So, I mean, we all just need to shut up and go away. I mean, the fact that I get shadow banned daily and lose followers daily is a reflection on me and my content, even though my content has been consistent. And there are accounts that have thousands and thousands of followers. The typical liberal has like somewhere close to 2 million followers. I never see his stuff. I have to physically type out his page the whole way, by the way, into Instagram to go to his page to see his stuff. But yeah, no, there's no bias. And if you ever do find a bias, another trick they do is they just call it a mistake. Oh, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Isn't it weird how the mistakes only happen on one side of the political aisle and not the other? Anyway, I thought I would open with that because it's just utterly ridiculous. Here's a piece from Fox News that dug into it a little bit. A new study that dismissed concerns that big tech favors liberals and was widely shared by members of the mainstream media was bankrolled by far-left megadonor to Joe Biden's presidential campaign. Conservatives have long accused big tech and social media giants of widespread bias, but the New York University study, quote, false accusation, the unfounded claim that social media companies censor conservatives, brushed away the notion that companies such as Facebook and Twitter favor liberals. The study was funded by Craig Newmark, a billionaire tech titan who donated $100,000 to Biden's campaign victory fund. That's according to Chuck Ross at the Daily Caller. Ross noted that NYU did not disclose the Craigslist founder's political views. Newmark has also donated to a variety of other liberal groups, yada, yada, yada. What's the other piece that I wanted to get here? Tucker Carlson said something about it on Fox News, and he said that this study almost reads like a press release from Silicon Valley, and that's because it is. This so-called academic study was in fact paid for by big tech. It was funded by a man called Craig Newmark. Already covered that part with you, blah, 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 blah. And he's paying for this. The study's lead author is Paul Barrett, the deputy director of the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights, an entity whose very name ought to arouse suspicion among those paying big bucks to learn about business at NYU. Barrett released another study on why we should be very nice to big tech, as well as deeply respectful and always obedient. That study was also funded by Craig Newmark, as well as George Soros. Of course, it's merely a coincidence that these studies, both funded by big tech, arrive at conclusions favorable to big tech. To read the 24-page paper is to be force-fed the word disinformation, which appears 14 times in the document. Each time, it's accompanied by a stylistic sneer like this one. Quote, "The false bias narrative is an example of political disinformation, meaning an untrue assertion that is spread to deceive. In this instance, the deception whips up part of the conservative base, much of which already bitterly distrusts the mainstream media." Oh, why do we distrust the mainstream media? I don't know. That's a mystery. To call the bias claim disinformation does not, of course, rule out that millions of people sincerely believe it. Anyway, George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley points to a passage that exposes the paper's folly. Quote, "The question of whether social media companies harbor an anti-conservative bias can't be answered conclusively because the data available to academic and civil society researchers aren't sufficiently detailed. Existing periodic enforcement disclosures by Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are helpful but not granular enough to allow thorough analysis by outsiders." So buried on page 20 of this paper under the header of conclusions and recommendations, the authors call on big tech to release more data for researchers. And yet, despite this dearth of data, the paper's authors have nonetheless concluded that the claim by conservatives of censorship bias is without merit. As Turley concludes, this study is neither conclusive or particularly compelling. It read more like an extended 20-page opinion editorial. It does seem itself to have a pronounced bias, particularly in declaring allegations of bias as false and disinformation, while quietly noting that it cannot conclusively say whether there is bias. I had another article pulled up here, but I've been beating a dead horse, though. But yet, Twitter and Facebook and these companies literally gave this study micro information to no information and basically said, yeah, there's no bias. Okay, well, where's our data? We did the data, and we can't give you all the data because of reasons and guidelines, and yeah. So you'll just have to trust us on this. Okay, so again, I boil all that down to say that liberal donors and big tech investigated liberal donors and big tech and found that liberal donors and big tech did nothing wrong, and conservatives are all crazy and conspiracy theorists and need to go away. Case closed. And now that the dust has settled on the January 6th quote-unquote insurrection on the Capitol, insurrections are usually armed, and they're not just a handful of knuckleheads with buffalo horns and flags, but whatever. It's more of a riot than an insurrection, but the news always has to make it worse than what it is. Now that the dust has settled on all of that, I wanted to do some fact versus fiction about what happened at the Capitol. Reason being because there's a second impeachment trial of former President Trump that's happening. And the basis of the argument is that he incited violence and insurrection by a speech that he gave on January 6th before the Capitol riots. Every person that instigated these riots had already left for the Capitol while he was still speaking, by the way. He wasn't even finished up with his speech, and everybody that was like the instigators, the agitators, had already left. He had also said in his speech a few different times about peacefully and patriotically letting our voices be heard. The news is taking this soundbite where he said strength or something like that, and they're chopping it up to where there's no context before or end. And I know, shocking that the news would do that. They've done that with so many of his speeches and things he said so many times. Like, I can't even start recounting all of them. The most famous one being the very fine people thing. Oh my gosh, he called white supremacists very fine people. No, he didn't. If You know what? I'm not even going to get into it. I've covered it on my podcast so many times now of how the media manipulates audio and video and cuts it out and puts it back in at the right exact moment to do maximum damage. I'm not even going to go there. Anyway, also another fact versus fiction is this Capitol protest and march was planned before Trump was even going to be there to give a speech. He hadn't planned to show up to this thing and give a speech until later. So this thing was planned before the president showed up to give a speech. Another fact versus fiction is that Parler, the social media alternative to Twitter, got taken down by all of the big tech oligarchs because all of this right-wing insurrection and domestic terrorism was planned on Parler. The only problem with that is that it's 100% not true. I can give you article and statistics and data that show that this was planned, ironically enough, on Facebook and Twitter. And the main agitators, as I've shown in my other podcasts, were actually members of Antifa and BLM masquerading as Trump supporters. And I can hear my friends on the left already going, "Oh, Ronald, are you saying that the right's not capable of this?" No, of course. The right's human beings. Left's human beings. Human beings are capable of anything. I'm saying what caused the original incitement and agitation were bad actors. There's also the clip that I showed you a few podcasts ago about the actual CNN reporter in the building on hidden camera going, "Yeah, we did it." A CNN reporter celebrating and going, yeah, we did it, while inside the Capitol. Everything that we're being told that's happened has not happened, and this is all going to be done under the guise, all of this cracking down of conservatives and wiping out alternative speech platforms and policing conservatives is going to be done under the guise of, well, we have to protect you from domestic terrorism. It's the same thing that happened with the Patriot Act after 9/11. The state expanded their ability to wiretap people, American citizens, and I wasn't in favor of it then, even as a card-carrying Republican, and Bush was the one signing off on it. I thought that was a horrible idea, and here we are. And as usual, there's a double standard from the left. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that all of their allegations are 100% true, and Trump did incite the riots and the supposed insurrection. How is that standard not also applied to a Bernie Sanders supporter who actually shot up with a freaking rifle an entire baseball field of Republican senators? Shot at them, Bernie Sanders supporters. Almost killed Steve Scalise. I mean, he was critical for a long time, for weeks. He almost died. A lot of people were injured. Rand Paul has been beaten up a few times now. People have been harassed. Dan Bongino was harassed. A lot of Democrats were harassed in one of those speeches in D.C. that Trump gave from the White House. As people were leaving the Capitol, they were harassed and beat up. And it's funny because those standards are never applied, because I guarantee they're Bernie Sanders supporters and Bernie and AOC supporters and supporters of Liz Warren and Maxine Waters. They are never held to that same standard. Remember Maxine Waters with her megaphone going, "You get up in their face, you push back on them, you tell them they're not welcome." Nope. She was actually, MSNBC, in a weird moment of actual journalism, asked her about the justification of Trump's inciting if what she does isn't also inciting. And she deflected and said, "I have never heard of any Democrat ever that has ever done something like this." Even though the journalist just gave her the example of her doing it herself, and she's like, "Oh no, I've never heard of any Democrat doing that ever." You can watch the clip. It's out there. A shocking moment of journalism on MSNBC. And now the journalist did cloak it with, Trump's a liar and he incited the violence. So let's not celebrate too much. But anyway, how is that standard not applied to Bernie and AOC and Ilhan Omar and all the left-wing bad actors when one of their followers does something bad? It's not. Gee, it's almost as if there's a double standard and the left has no standards and principles, and it's really just whatever fits their political ideology for that nanosecond in nano history. If they need to change the language to beat you up, they will change the language. If they need to change the rules at the last minute to favor them, they will change the rules. No, I'm not even going to get into voter fraud again and how all these states just happen to be the ones that Trump needed, how they all changed their election laws, and how the states count ballots and everything at the freaking last minute. I'm not even going to get into that again, or I'm going to make myself angry. And I would be remiss if I did not address the laughability of AOC injecting herself into a time in history that she wasn't a part of. So she did this Instagram live where guys, like, she was so scared, like, that the evil Trump supporters and Ted Cruz was going to go, take her out and kill her because of the storming of the Capitol. So she got called out for lying. One big portion of the lie is the Capitol Dome is not the Capitol complex, and her office is actually separate from the Capitol Dome. It would be like some shit going down at Magic Kingdom in Disney World, and me being over at Epcot Center going, oh my God, I was so scared. They're storming Cinderella's castle, and I'm over at the big golf ball in Epcot. It's just, I would be an idiot, and I would be a liar, and that's what's happening. So she got called out on it, and what they usually do when they get called out is they deflect. They call everybody else racist and misogynist and bigoted for not believing their lie. And so, yeah, she's doubled down. Nothing will happen to her, and she will skate, and that's there are no consequences for people on the left. Ilhan Omar was busted. She's committed immigration fraud by marrying her brother and by funneling about 80% of her now husband's money came from her giving his firm campaign contributions for help. So she funneled her campaign money to her now husband back into herself. And you'll never hear about it. It's because it's Democrat privilege. If there is a privilege that exists, I wouldn't call it white privilege unless you're a white liberal. Then everything you do is okay. It's justified. There is certainly Democrat privilege. If a Republican congressman had done that, it would be on the news 24/7. But I digress. With the exception of maybe a Harvey Weinstein or a Jeffrey Epstein, to where like it gets so cumbersome that they just can't cover for you anymore, and then it finally gets exposed. I didn't plan on talking about that, but think about that. One journalist on the left, Ronan Farrow, who actually did some journalism, who actually was a journalist for a brief second in history, did some good in the world, and brought Harvey Weinstein to justice. Think about if all of the journalists that we have in the United States actually did journalism and not narratives and not talking points and not political propaganda. Case in point, to my friends on the left, I think I've asked this question before. Did you hear about the Hunter Biden laptop China Joe Biden big money controversy scandal? Did you hear about it before the election or after the election? This is what left-wing journalism does. They will finally give you a kernel of the truth and just drip it out slow over a period of months, sometimes even years, so that they can look back in history and go, oh no, we gave you that story. They split it up over weeks, months, sometimes even years. So when you go back to revisit it and you go, well, what about this double standard? What about Hunter Biden? What about Joe Biden actually taking money from China, like in documented evidence? Like, oh yeah, that's old news. It's old news. Get over it. Another tactic of the left. Think about it. Think about it if journalists actually did their job and broke the stories as they happened and were actually real truth seekers and not propaganda artists. How much of a better spot we would be in. Yeah, call out the bad. Call out the good, though, too. And they don't. They won't. I'm applauding Ronan Farrow. He's the son of Mia Farrow. Used to be married to Woody Allen. So yeah, he's for sure a Manhattanite growing up in the New York liberal bubble sphere. But I seriously applaud him for doing that, for starting the Me Too movement. Yes, the Me Too movement has been used for political theater and to weaponize as well, but it took down Harvey Weinstein. That was pretty good. I mean, that was amazing. So think one left-wing journalist who actually told the truth and did some journalism, and think of the good that he did. Now, again, imagine if all journalists did that, and they actually reported the news, and they actually reported facts, and didn't just report propaganda. Remember, Project Veritas released this hidden camera footage video of the CNN boardroom in the mornings, like 9 a.m. for their briefings, going through their briefings, how to slant the news, literally how to slant the news. How do we cover this story? How do we make Joe Biden look better in this? A news outlet. I mean, of course, I'm preaching to the converted now, if you're listening to my podcast, calling out the news media for being propaganda, but like, this should literally be everywhere, and it's not. These stories just get buried all the time. Because, again, the news has investigated the news, and the news has found out that the news has done nothing wrong. Recurring theme on today's podcast. But anyway, speaking of today's podcast, yeah, this is my 99th episode, and we'll be coming up to my 100th episode soon.
Oh, yeah!
Ronald, do you have something cool planned? No. I'm going to be pulling it out of my butt, probably. But yeah, my 100th episode will be coming up, and this is episode 99. It's going to be a landmark for Publitarian Podcast. Thank you guys for sticking with me this many episodes. My downloads and numbers have consistently gone up, not by a lot, but hey, they've gone up. And some episodes do better than others. Some episodes I get like so many downloads, I'm like, oh wow, these people really care. And then other episodes I do, 16 people listen. So I'm like, okay, I don't know if it's big tech or just some days I'm better than others. But anyway, I appreciate everyone that's here that listens to the podcast and gives me about 20 minutes of your time. So I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for sticking with me and listening to Publitarian Podcast. Like I said, I always just try and give you the truth. Yes, there's a right slant to what I say, but really, even if it harms me politically, ideologically, I gotta tell you the truth. And so that's what I try to be. I try to be a straight shooter. If you want to reach out to me, you can. I'm Publitarian at protonmail.com. I'm on all the social medias, and I've been a little bit more active on Gab lately. The Gabs seem to have cleaned up their act a little bit. But anyway, I'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace out.
Listening to Publitarian Podcast. Copyright 2021.